Shireen is the Director, Education and Community Engagement Officer at the Islamic Museum of Australia. She served as Vice President and Executive Committee member of the Islamic Council of Victoria for 8 years. To date, he has conducted over 1,000 information sessions on Islam to diverse audiences ranging from the Flying Fruit Fly Circus schools to the Australian Federal Police. In 2016, Shireen was selected as Muslim Woman of the Year at the Australian Muslim Achievement Awards. In January 2018, she was awarded a Medal of the Order of Australia. Shireen also works closely with educators to align the Islamic Museum education programs to the national and Victorian curriculum. With us, we also have Rabbi Gabby Coltman. Rabbi Gabby leads the ARC Center based in Hawthorne East. Through his openness and inclusive approach to Judaism, Rabbi Gabby has redefined the 21st century synagogue with the context of modern orthodoxy with a greater focus on song and spirituality. Rabbi Gabby is part of the Victorian government's anti-racism task force and president of Jewish Christian Muslim Association. He also holds a Master of Social Work and is a chairman of Melbourne Fight Back Against Parkinson's Group, Incorporated, a non-for-profit charity that assists people with Parkinson's disease. With us, we also have Jasper Singh Surapada. Jasper is a chairperson of the Sikh Interfaith Council of Victoria. He's also a member of the Multifaith Advisory Group, Spiritual Health Association, Faith Communities Council of Victoria, Victoria Police Multifaith Council, Victorian Council of Churches Emergencies Ministry, KC Cardinia and Dandenong Interfaith Network, and the Victorian Sikh Gurdwaras Council. Jasper is founding director of the Sikh Australian Support for Family Violence Incorporated. With us, we also have Dr. Diana Cousins. Dr. Diana Cousins has represented the Buddhist community in Melbourne in interfaith dialogue for over the past 22 years. She is the Vice President of the Buddhist Council of Victoria. She was appointed by Her Highness Sakya Trizin, head of the Shakya lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, as the representative in Melbourne from 1997 to 2008. During this time, she was the director of the Melbourne Shakya Centre. She represents the Buddhist community on the Victorian State Government's Multifaith Advisory Group. And also with us, we have Jackie Molloy. Jackie is responsible for all projects and communications at the Meaningful Aging Australia. Prior to working in the aged care sector, she spent more than 3 decades as a corporate communication strategist, coach, and consultant, focusing on leadership communications. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us. I will now give the space to Nikki.
As you can see already, we have a very interesting panel here together with us. I'm going to show you what we have in terms of the questions we are going to ask today, each panelist. What do aged care organizations need to know when delivering care for their faith communities, including diversity of their communities and key considerations in supporting their communities in the aging process? And then the question 2 for Meaningful Aging Australia, what resources are available to support diversity in spiritual care? And we'll start with Shireen to answer the first question.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how individuals working in the aged care sector, how they can address the needs of Muslim patients. So a really important factor to take into consideration is how incredibly diverse the Muslim community is. So there are 50 million Muslims in China, there are Aboriginal Muslims, 7th generation Anglo-Celtic Australian Muslims. So if you've had experience dealing with someone from the Turkish community, you might find that their culture is actually very different from those from other backgrounds. So it's really important to keep that in mind, how incredibly diverse the Muslim community is, and just to try and treat each person as an individual. Something to think about: some Muslims are uncomfortable shaking hands or sustained eye contact with the opposite gender. This is not a sign of disrespect. This is not a sign that you are less than what they are. That's actually their way of showing respect. And it's important that we can discern, that we can tell the difference between what is culture and what is religion, because sometimes cultural practices that exist in so-called Muslim countries can often contradict Islamic teachings. So some tips: be wary of unconscious bias. Always ask, always consult, never make assumptions, never jump to conclusions. This is something that I feel very strongly about. My father-in-law was in an aged care facility, in a mainstream aged care facility initially, and then he went to a Muslim aged care facility. And sadly, I found some of the workers made assumptions about some of his needs, or about what was the best thing for him. I said, look, he's got all his faculties. Please just have a conversation with him. Don't speak on his behalf. Don't make decisions on his behalf. Always try and consult with him. Visitation of the sick is a highly virtuous act in Islam. It's something that we are very much encouraged to do. So you may find that Muslim patients have very large numbers of patients. Sometimes they might be, disregard visiting hours, which can be a little bit problematic. But please try and be patient, because it's such an essential part of their healing. Respect to the elderly is paramount. Up until just a few decades ago, in the wider community, in society, we would always address a person using Mr., Mrs., and it's only recent times that we address people that are older than ourselves using their first name. So in order to show respect, it's really important if you can just use their title, Mr. or Mrs., or even auntie and uncle. Try to avoid the use of family for interpreting. So in terms of religious requirements, halal food options are really essential. Sadly, I found this wasn't always an option when my father-in-law was in an aged care facility. There was one time there was pea and ham soup on the menu and no vegetarian options at all. So if you can always ensure that a vegetarian or a seafood option is there. Practicing Muslims will need to perform their 5 daily prayers. Those who are able to, they will pray on a praying mat, performing all the different actions. Those who are not able to, they might just be in their bed, just lying down in their bed. So it's best not to disturb them or have conversation with them when they are praying. It's quite frustrating that some elderly people insist on fasting Ramadan. My father is in this category. He is a diabetic. He has Alzheimer's and he's 82 and he's insisting on fasting. And it's so difficult to try and explain to him he does not need to fast. Elderly people, sick people are all exempt from fasting. So, yeah, you might need some support to try and convince them. In terms of rites of death, family members are encouraged to recite the Quran on a dying person. So if you can, when there are signs that an individual is going to pass, perhaps give the family members adequate notice so that they can be there. Sadly, we weren't able to be with my father-in-law when he passed away. And that's something that we feel very sad about. Practicing Muslims never cremate. They always bury. They wash and shroud the body with a very plain cloth. And funeral arrangements are very simple. The funeral should be conducted as soon as possible, and you can just simply contact the Muslim funeral service. Don't assume a Muslim's behaviour is due to their religion. It might be their culture, their local customs, their upbringing, or simply their personality type. And for more support and professional development, you can contact the Islamic Museum of Australia. We run cultural awareness training for organisations, all kinds of organisations. And you can also contact the ICV. They have an amazing hospital chaplaincy program. So I would really encourage you to contact the Islamic Council of Victoria.
Thanks very much, Shireen, for that amazing overview. Very insightful, obviously. Now we go to the next panelist, which is Diana.
Like the Islamic community, the Buddhist community is extremely diverse. Now, there are two major branches, Theravada and Mahayana. Theravada people are from Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Burma, Sri Lanka, Indonesia. Mahayana from Tibet, China, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, Mongolia, Nepal, and Bhutan. The key considerations are such things as language, food, and recognition of the sacred. Ideally, people who belong to a particular language group would join together at particular nursing homes. I imagine that if a nursing home had 10 or more residents from a particular background, then it would be possible to specialise and employ staff who spoke their language and provide appropriate recipes to the kitchen. Food is very important to all people, and country-specific food is most appreciated. Additionally, many Chinese and Vietnamese Buddhists are vegetarian or vegetarian on specific days, such as Full Moon Day and New Moon Day. Additionally, for Chinese and Vietnamese residents, there are beliefs about the balance of hot and cold in their cuisine. Now, these ideas originally come from Taoism, not Buddhism, but they relate to concepts such as yin and yang. Yin is the female principle and characterized as cool and weak, and yang is the male principle and characterized as hot and strong. If people feel cool and weak, then they will want hot and strong food. Similarly, if people feel overheated, then they will want cool food. And then we've got neutral food, which is somewhere in the middle. Language, food, and a sense of the sacred. Every Buddhist would probably like to have a shrine in their room with a Buddha statue, perhaps a framed image, some flowers or artificial flowers, maybe bowls with water, perhaps a food offering like a piece of fruit, and in a perfect world, incense and candles. These days you can get battery-powered or electric candles, but there is no substitute for burning incense. Perhaps sometimes there could be an outdoor shrine which would allow the burning of incense, obviously not on total fire ban days. Some people like to listen to chanting a lot, and perhaps they could be given headphones. Our Buddhists have a sacred calendar, and that includes major occasions like the Buddha's birthday, Lunar New Year, and the Day of Remembering Ancestors. But it also includes more regular special days such as full moon days and new moon days. Now, these calendars vary from culture to culture. Tibetan New Year is often not in the same month as Chinese and Vietnamese New Year. If you have a large Buddhist group in your nursing home, it would be good to set up a Buddhist shrine room where people can make offerings and sit quietly repeating mantras or listening to chanting. It would also help to have monks or nuns coming in regularly to give blessings. Buddhists find a lot of benefit from sitting in beautiful gardens, not being inside all the time. And this goes to the idea of balance, but also goes to another key idea, which is of harmony. Gardens and statues should create a sense of harmony. Now, there are 2 aged care facilities in the west of Melbourne providing aged care to the Vietnamese community very successfully, run by the Elderly Refugees Association of Victoria. And so this one, I've just put the slide up here, the Mekong Kenley Aged Care Facility for the Vietnamese community. Now, it's built next to a Vietnamese Buddhist shrine. It's got, each resident has shrines in their rooms. They have a dedicated shrine room. They have culturally appropriate food. The staff at all levels speak Vietnamese. The temple members are on the board, on staff and our residents. They have beautiful gardens with Buddha statues. They have weekly Tai Chi classes and regular temple trips. So, I think a fact-finding mission to the Mekong Kenley Centre could be really valuable if you wanted to increase the cultural competency in your nursing homes. We've also got a generation gap. So the younger generation of Buddhists may have very different understandings and ideas, They may not know what the older generations want. And with this in mind, it's helpful to ask competent residents for an advanced care directive while they are still able to understand what they're being asked. It's a good idea to have an About Me book, which tells the story of a resident's life with family photos and information about the things they like and don't like. You can include photos of visiting temples and things like that. You can get prayer sheets with particular prayers from local temples. If you're able to get a family, if you're able to get a monk or a nun to come along, then let the family know so that the resident can make a cash donation to the monk in an envelope. It's important the donation is in an envelope and not given uncovered. It's also helpful to have prayer beads, and they can be very cheap, $5 to $20. A laminated chart on the wall with the name they prefer to be used, like the Islamic Council. Elderly Vietnamese people may want to be auntie something or uncle something, or they may want to be Mr. and Mrs., or they may have a Buddhist name that is quite different to the name on their passport, and they may prefer to be known by that. It's a good idea, if you can, to work with the arts and crafts person on running culturally appropriate crafts, which could be printing prayer flags or calligraphy or doing origami. And it's important for an older person to be certain about what arrangements have been made for their death. Now, some prefer cremation, some prefer burial, but whichever is chosen, they can be reassured that their wishes are respected. Most of all, show kindness, speak softly, ask questions, and listen. Thank you.
Now we go to Jasbir.
So welcome to the Sikh perspective of looking after aged sick patients in hospital. Sikhism places the responsibility of practicing religion on the individual. As a result, it's important for the healthcare providers to discuss religious observance needs with each patient. Some topics that healthcare providers may wish to discuss with their patient includes articles of faith, removal of body hair, ablution, bathing, cleanliness, dietary needs. Most Sikh might be vegetarian, however, not all are, and they do not eat halal food, and their prayers, which is very important. Prayers usually are said at dawn, before breakfast, in the afternoon, before sunset, and at night before they go to sleep. And in between, they can be also reciting or chanting some prayers. The sick patient may use to have a prayer book next to them. A drawer could be arranged at the bedside with, they'll normally wrap it in a cloth so that dirty hands are not touched and kept in a Ziploc bag. And hands should be washed. If somebody was to pass if the patient say, pass me the prayer book, just wash your hands respectfully. That will really help. We Sikhs have strong belief that prayers and faith have an important element in curing illness of the body and mind. In terms of sensitivity, Sikh may experience significant embarrassment when asked to remove articles of faith. And one of the most significant one and obvious one is our turban. Women also wear turban, so do men. So when the turban need to remove, it's good to pull the curtains, for some privacy, and they should be treated with the same level of respect of any of the 5 articles of faith. Now, these articles should not be worn, removed from the sick patient without the permission or consultation with the family. Of course, visitation is a good thing because visitation actually helps the patient in terms of healing, support, spiritual, social support. And whenever they visit, they always do prayer. Now, removal of hair of any part of the sick patient without consent from the patient or substitute decision maker, it's not allowed. The cutting of hair should be avoided because for us, from birth till death, we do not cut, shave, pluck any part of our body hair. And if something needs to happen, it's good to document it. Decision making, of course, if the patient is in good mindset, it's fine. If not, always consult, discuss with the family in terms of final stages of terminal illness. However, suicide, euthanasia are forbidden in the Sikh faith. 5 articles of faith, which are worn by men and women. So, kirpan, the kashara, the special short, the wooden comb, the bangle, and our sacred dagger. So, this is called kirpan. Kirpa means mercy and an means honor. Should ask permission from patient or the family before removing the article of faith. Prefer to be examined by the same gender, if possible. If not, it's okay. Just explain to them. If I need to do any invasive examination, like the aged care need to bring them to the hospital. Of course, again, same gender would be helpful. Always consult the family. Sometimes they might want to have a family member present to give them a bit of moral support. They might be afraid. And of course, in an event of a death, non-Sikhs can attend to the person and do not remove the 5 articles of faith even after death. Nothing, sometime I had patient where we had to collect from an aged home and they say we cleaned up the patient. When we went to check, they actually shaved the patient. So that was very, very bad. The family was in total shock and, given the grieving they was going through, it was just difficult to manage. So always consult a family when you're not aware of what is going on. Thank you very much.
We now go to Rabbi Gabi.
It's great to be here today. So Judaism is a monotheistic religion, meaning to say that we have a belief in one God, stemming all the way back from the founder of monotheism, Abraham, all those years ago. Judaism is based around the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, but that's what we use as a blueprint for our service and worship. A lot of what we do revolves around family, community, and everything else stems from that. So when people do enter into aged care, it's best to understand the different rituals, the yearly calendar, which is quite diverse and very busy. Judaism is quite a broad church, broad synagogue, if you don't mind me using that expression. So we will have very orthodox people, worshippers, to people that don't have much to do with the religion or the community at all. Usually, I would say within the Jewish community of Melbourne, which has about 50,000 Jews, the people that enter into aged care might opt into going into a Jewish-specific aged care facility, but a lot do not. And there are Jews scattered around aged care facilities all around Victoria. As I mentioned, it's good to know the closest synagogue slash rabbi, so you can engage with them to ask them to come in to speak to the client. Also to acquaint yourself with the yearly cycle, the yearly calendar, which is packed with Jewish holidays. That client might also want kosher food. Other panelists spoke about dietary requirements. So Jewish people, we keep kosher, which is the laws that stem from the Old Testament, from the Torah and so forth. But even if this client particularly that is not in a Jewish facility that wants to keep kosher or not a high level of kashrut, of kosher, they might want to engage in some of the food that they're used to when they went to Jewish events or when they were growing up. And as I see from my job as a rabbi visiting clients in age and community members in aged care facilities, they have a sense of yearning to go back to their youth, for community, and to feel the different holidays and to be involved in them. And that's why getting involved in understanding the Jewish calendar, speaking to your local synagogue and rabbi and getting them to come into the aged care facility or to speak to the client, also trying to obtain the relevant kosher foods that are connected to that specific festival. Often when I visit people in aged care facilities that aren't strictly Jewish, they tell me, Rabbi, we would love a chicken soup and matzah ball. Matzah ball, a piece of matzah, is from the holiday of Passover, and we grind up the matzah, and then they're made into balls mixed with egg, and then put into the chicken soup. And the debate is raging within the Jewish community, who makes the best chicken soup? Everybody claims that their mother makes the best chicken soup. But these are different foods that people are used to, regardless of their religious observance. They grew up eating them throughout their entire life, which they might not be able to easily obtain being in an aged care facility. For another example of food that you can really engage with the client is, for the Jewish New Year, we eat an apple dipped in honey, which is why it's something so important, as I've mentioned, getting involved in understanding the yearly cycle. Going back to community and how Judaism largely revolves around community, there is Jewish songs, which, depending on your background and where you come from, we all know mainly and roughly the same famous Jewish songs. So even going up on the internet and speaking and looking for yourself as working in an aged care environment and wanting to connect with this specific client and writing famous Jewish songs and putting them on for this client, that will spark something in them, and they will be greatly appreciative of hearing the music of their childhood, of their youth, of what they're used to listening to in synagogue and so forth. So it's really a client-centered approach and understanding, as the other panelists have mentioned, who this client is, where they come from, what stream of religion do they connect with or do they previously have an involvement in? And you might also find clients that don't have a specific religion, and there's other ways to connect with them and so forth. But when it comes to somebody that has a religious background that's visibly or might not even visibly be Jewish, it's about understanding their theology, not on an in-depth basis, but understanding where they come from and the background and their thinking, at the same time as then trying to connect with them and involve them and engross them in their religion. And there are many different services around for clients that are of the Jewish faith. You can get in touch with the Jewish Community Council Victoria. You're also more than welcome to get in touch with myself. Nicholas, I'm sure will share my details after this. But also it's about doing, in a way, your own background research on this client and seeing, if I'm located in the West, well, then what is the closest synagogue? And that's just via an easy Google search. But also speaking to the family and saying, you know what, we understand that Christmas is coming up, like December, but at the same time, we also understand that Hanukkah is usually around about the same time as Christmas. And similar to just what we had a couple of weeks ago, and to all the Muslims on today, I wish them Ramadan Mubarak. It's finishing today, tomorrow. There's a couple more hours left of Ramadan, but at the same time, we had Passover, Easter, and Ramadan all overlapping together. And for somebody that's running an aged care facility, it's important that you know that, so you can have, again, that client-centered approach, and you can be as inclusive as possible. So the Muslim clients will be celebrating Ramadan, Jewish ones will be celebrating Passover. That means getting in contact or doing the research and seeing how you can involve them. Again, going back to music and food, if that is really the easiest way possible. Another thing, as I mentioned, is to bring in a rabbi and bring in the family and do something like that for also the entire residents to see. So really being as inclusive as possible and celebrating different people's cultures and backgrounds. And again, I'm not going to speak for the Christian panelists and the people that represented Christianity, but we had Easter as well. So all those three overlap. And it's just about being conscious of who your clients are, what their backgrounds, and then trying to find the relevant support. And that's why we're here today speaking about what you can do and how you can involve your clients as best possible in their backgrounds and faith. And you'll reap the benefits of that by taking a client-centered approach. The client will be more responsive, more engaged with you, because it's a two-way street, and they understand that you care as much about them as possible.
Thanks very much, Rabbi Gabi, for sharing your insights with us and connecting it to real things that people can do as part of person-centered care. We now go to Jackie.
Thanks, Nikki, and thank you for having me here. I'm Jackie Malloy from Meaningful Aging Australia on the land of the Wurundjeri people. And Meaningful Aging Australia, if you don't know, is the national peak body for championing the spiritual care and emotional well-being of older people receiving care in residential and community aged care settings. So what exactly is spiritual care? Spiritual care in the context of aged care is care that ensures that every older person's spirituality is supported. So how do we define spirituality? Spirituality is how we as humans create meaning, hope, purpose, and connection in our lives. It's what we think of as an umbrella that all faith sits under, and also that no faith sits under. Because when we talk about multi-faith, I believe it's important to also acknowledge no faith in that collective. For some, spirituality might include religion and expressions of faith and cultural faith. And for others, it may be about the peace and emotional well-being they experience through a connection with nature or poetry or music or through meditation or of being service to others. As humans, it's natural and necessary for us to feel connected in our life and in our world. But how we do that is a deeply individual choice. So if we're truly committed to helping people to live and die well, this means understanding each person in a way that honors who they have been, who they are now, and who they are becoming. And in the time of such a significant transition, and often with pain and grief and many losses, this cohort of humans is the most inclined to seriously reflect on the matter and purpose of their lives and really wonder about their place in the world and how they belong. So we need to be prepared to have the conversations and take the actions that matter most to each person. And when we get spiritual care right, it's inclusive of all diversity. It means that for those who do follow a faith, and as we've heard today, the kind of specific needs and rights that are attached to those faiths, it means that for those who do follow a faith, that their needs and rights related to that faith are upheld. But spiritual care does not necessarily require a person of faith to deliver it. Although, of course, we want access to faith leaders and services and ceremonies to be available as well. But many of our resources are geared towards personal care workers to be able to be better equipped to, compassionately engage with older people in a way that makes it most appropriate for that person. And I'll share some of those resources in a moment. Knowing what is important to an individual is the everything. It's how we can truly connect with the reality of the older person at that time in that place. And religious practices and traditions and rituals can speak to the deepest parts of our identity and offer a unique kind of support. But it's important to note that everyone's sense of spirituality, even if they don't call it that, even if they turn up their nose at the idea of spirituality, is that everyone's sense of spirituality is there and present and part of their identity, whether they follow a faith or not. So let me tell you about some of our resources, and also got to acknowledge the centre and the fantastic resources and services they provide. So as I said, many faiths have a particularly deep relationship, we've heard it today, with culture and family and community. The centre is really important for supporting that diversity. And so is this book, which is going to be really hard to see, but it's called Multifaith Practices. And in fact, some of our panel have contributed to this book. And it's a lovely book that covers the most common faiths in Australia, with the exception of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander spirituality. I'll come to that in a second. The book covers Buddhism and Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and Sikhism. So we've certainly had representation here today from all of those faiths. And for each faith, it sets out main beliefs and values. If there is a sacred text aligned with the faith, what the holy days are and the ritual observances, caring practices during illness, end-of-life practices, and some readings and prayers. And this isn't just a book with information, but it's also something that can be shared with an older person whose faith is represented here. And sharing the relevant pages of the book and respectfully asking, is this important to you? Can you tell me some stories about this, some of your practices or memories? These are great ways to start a conversation and engage more deeply. Next, we have the national guidelines for spiritual care in aged care. Again, you won't be able to see it very well, but this is a document that we put together before the first aged care quality standards even were released. And it's the document that provides the foundational understanding for aged care service providers of spirituality, spiritual care, and the importance of respect in all contexts. We also have a spiritual care consideration series, and these are short 2-page guides which we share with our member organisations. And these include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander spirituality, Jehovah's Witness spirituality, intellectual disability and spirituality, intersex older people and spirituality, trans and gender diverse older people, and lots more, lots of different angles of diversity. So these set out guiding thoughts and questions to keep in mind as you care for older people from a range of backgrounds. And last, I want to share a really important resource, which is like our flagship resource. It's called Connect To. And Connect To is essentially a tool to identify spirituality. It's Australian. It's been rigorously tested and reviewed and validated. And it's a tool to understand what's most important to an older person. And so we say that Connect To gives us the eyes to see and the ears to hear. It uses a visual map of 5 domains of spirituality and really easily accessible language to help guide the conversation or admissions process, to introduce the 5 domains of spirituality: connection to self, connection with others, connection with nature, connection with creativity, and connection with something bigger, which is where faith and religion sits, but also allows for no faith, because it's possible to believe in something bigger without actually believing in something or some faith.
Thanks very much, Jackie. And thanks to all the panelists, for your contributions and, sharing what's dear to you, what's dear to the communities you're working with. And that's really relevant for aged care providers to know. Is there anything that you wanted to add, maybe as faith leaders or for Meaningful Aging Australia, which we haven't covered, which is important for aged care providers to know? And you, Rabbi Gabby, you touched on the personal connection as well. You said people can contact you. So is that for everyone? Can people contact you after this if they want further information, or should they go to the local, whether it's temple, synagogue? What is the best? Is there what's the best approach? Anything comes to your mind as I'm asking this question? Maybe I start with you, Rabbi Gabe.
Welcome for anybody to contact me and so forth, and we can work out the closest synagogue or Jewish community center or rabbinical leader that's close to the facility. I think this is just imperative, and there are sometimes, I'll tell you just a quick story. I went to the West. I was called out to the West. Somebody got in touch with me from the JCCV at an aged care facility, and in touch with somebody, a dementia patient, and she spoke Yiddish, which is, a German Hebrew dialect from Eastern Europe and Western Europe, which Jews spoke and still continue to speak. It's not so common as it once was. And she kept saying, she wanted to see a rebbe, which is a revered term for a rabbi, for a very holy rabbi. So I came out there and we had the most incredible conversation, even though, she was early on dementia and so forth. And I was able to then put her in touch with a catering company that facility then got in touch. And then every Jewish holiday, she received her kosher food, just so she can keep that little bit of connection to the Jewish community. So, it's just about knowing where to go and knowing what to do, and to have that person-centered, client-centered approach to make them as comfortable as possible.
We have another question, and maybe I will ask it to Jackie. What would a spiritual goal be if a resident lives in a residential care facility which is not religious? What would you say there?
I was just writing that in the chat, actually, to learn what's important to them. Yeah, and this is where Connect 2 is really a very useful tool, as well as a very beautiful way to hold that conversation, because knowing what fills a person up, and you might not start with the words around spiritual care or spirituality, but just finding out what's important to them, what makes them feel like they belong, what makes them feel connected in their life or in their life before they were in this facility. If they were someone who really enjoyed bushwalks, for example, but physically can't do that anymore, but that was such an important part of how they found peace, then that's useful information to know that the smells of the bush, native flowers, a soundscape in their room, photographs that they had taken in their life, that sort of thing can help to bring them a sense of who they are, their identity is coming back. So finding out what's important is the number one thing.
You know, I was once with somebody and we were speaking about what they liked. And he goes, well, I used to live on the Murray and I used to love drinking beers. Do you know what I mean? It could be anything,
Yeah, absolutely.
So diverse, and everybody's got something that resonates with them that's different. Some might be bushwork, some might be sitting on the Murray.
And it's and the guy on the Murray with the beer, it's like, don't look now, but you're being spiritual. That's your spiritual, that was your spiritual expression. Yeah.
Exactly.
One question was from Arfa. He was asking, do aged care staff get any training to deal with people practicing different faiths and cultures? And the other point was from Rachel. Is there any person in particular, somebody they can approach in the community to learn more about different faiths?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we have not had any aged care approach us for any kind of training. However, hospitals have approached us and we have gone into hospitals to provide training, but not in aged care. And whether they have training or not, I think is for the organization to know, because it's not part of we are all volunteers from faith. We go in there, we have training in chaplaincy. So we go into the aged care and provide spiritual and religious support to the patient and their family. So I think very important is this kind of platform that you guys have organized. This should be brought around to all aged cares to, invite us as a group or individually at certain times to upskill their staff.
Our experts on Buddhism are generally the abbots in the temples. And there are temples. It's a very distributed system in Buddhism. So there are temples all over Melbourne and all over Australia. So if you want to get in touch with people who are able to assist your residents, then look for the nationality temple in your neighbourhood and talk to them. And if you want a further education in meditation or mindfulness, well, there's all sorts of people teaching meditation and mindfulness everywhere. So that's a very big topic.
I'll leave it to Shireen to maybe say some final comments. If there are any comments from you, Shireen, in terms of the panel discussion, what you've seen in terms of questions in the chat box, anything you thought you wanted to add?
I found this discussion fascinating, and I saw a lot of similarities between Islam and the other faith groups as well. I did want to just mention just two things really quickly. I'm happy to be a personal contact. Anyone who'd like to have a segue into the Muslim community, I'm happy to facilitate that. So I'm happy for my details to be shared with the panelists, with the participants. The other thing I don't think we covered was something around a ward communication tool. I've noticed, I visited a family friend that they had very limited English, and something basic, I don't know, Jackie, if there's anything that exists like that, some kind of laminated sort of tool where the patient can just point to food, water, phone. They have them in some hospitals. I haven't seen them in an aged care facility, just in case an interpreter isn't available and the person has very limited English. Is there anything like that available to people who don't speak English?
So I answered that for you, Shireen. Actually, we have our multilingual communication cards on our website under culturediversity.com.au. And exactly what you're saying, we have it with different pictures. We're getting a real pronunciation. We're going to have phrases. It's it's not like, obviously, we're using communication cards. So please feel free to, contact us for that. And if you have any other ideas for resources, we can maybe think whether we can develop new, but we definitely have that under the culturediversity.com.au website. So yeah, thanks for that, for raising. It's really important. It's actually our most popular resource at the moment. So yeah, great. So I just want to thank all the panelists for your amazing contribution. I think it's a really, really important topic. We may see if there's a follow-up from today, because we had, very, very high interest in today's conversation. So I just really want to thank you warmly for your presentation on behalf of the Center and all the people who are participating today for your contributions.